Welcome back to the Financial Symmetry Show. Chad Smith here with Grayson Blazek this week. And it's a new year. And right at the end of the year, we got another package, another bill passage with some retirement provisions that may impact you in positive ways. We're going to run through those today. Grayson, you've put together a list here. So let's, and what was the bill? Over 4,000 pages, right? So hundreds of changes, but I know you've tried to summarize it, and I look forward to jumping in here, and I think our listeners will benefit from this. But I was having some meetings at the end of the year about this very topic. So let's jump into this first one here, and it's changes to the required minimum distributions.
Yeah, so as Chad kind of touched on there, this is the Secure Act 2.0. So the initial Secure Act passed 3 years ago. So this is the second iteration, and it came with almost 100 changes / provisions. So rather than trying to touch on every single one today, we really tried to package this podcast in a way that casting the widest net to changes that may impact the most listeners. And so we're going to start with retirees. And so I think probably the one that's gotten the most coverage from the Secure Act 2.0 is changes to required minimum distributions. If we remember, prior to the Secure Act, the original one 3 years ago, RMD age was 70 and a half. 2019, they changed it to 72, and now once again they're revisiting it and pushing it out even further. So that's being changed now to 73 for some taxpayers and potentially out to 75 for another group of taxpayers. So there's a lot of dates that we're going to cover today, but I think the easiest and most simple way to think of this is if you have a birth date from 1951 to 1959, your new RMD age is 73. That'll be when you need to take your first RMD. So if you're turning 72 this year and you were thinking you were going to have to take your first RMD, you actually have an additional year to wait. If you were born on January 1st, 1960 or beyond, your RMD is going to be 75.
When we encounter things like this, like the last time we had it pushed back, it opens up some opportunities, right? And these are the things we like to dig into. Many times starting in the fall, we're thinking through tax planning opportunities for clients. So as you're thinking through that, what are some of the new ways we might think of how we're going to implement opportunities that are now here we didn't have before?
Yeah, so I think of every potential planning opportunity as an opportunity to take action. Mm-hmm. And so if we have inaction on that potential opportunity, one way you can think of that as potentially a mistake. But it is something that it's important to think through year over year is the idea of not having to take an RMD for some as an initial response may be welcome news. With the delay in RMD age, that means extra years to defer that income, which on the surface, maybe that's something you think is a great thing. And my response to that is, in many ways, yes, the tax deferral is a great thing. But consider how the delay in taking withdrawals from retirement accounts impacts your lifetime tax burden. And by lifetime tax burden, that's really at Financial Symmetry, the way we try to view tax planning is rather than looking at 2023 and 2024 and 2025 independently, we're really trying to get a sense of how actions you take in the current tax year not only impact your current year tax, but your lifetime tax burden.
Wait, are you saying that paying taxes now actually can make some sense?
It can. As odd as that might sound, we might want to bring in income sooner. And that's the biggest thing is if now you're saying, I don't turn 73 for a couple more years, I'm just going to sit back, maybe live off dividends in my brokerage account or my bank account, maybe some Social Security depending on your situation. I get it. Maybe that's your initial response. But this brings in the idea of a planning opportunity, which is, do we want to complete Roth conversions potentially? And the idea behind that is, say, if you're paying 12% this year, versus if you wait and do nothing and pay 25% in the future, you're paying a little bit more over your lifetime if you just wait.
And I would plug here, Grayson and I did a webinar of sorts that we can link in the show notes where we went through an example, a planning example with Joe and Sue Sample couple describing how a Roth conversion can benefit you over that lifetime tax burden. So you might want to check that out if you want to go into more detail.
Kind of a segue with the idea of the RMD in mind is, if we remember, in the first iteration of Secure Act 1.0, whatever you want to call it, was the change to inherited RMDs. It was the death of the stretch, introducing this 10-year withdrawal requirement. So the Secure Act 2.0, there's no major changes in that fashion, but there did add one potential option for spousal beneficiaries. So if you inherit a retirement account from your spouse. And this is something that, as with many things, it's just you're evaluating the different options you have available to you as a surviving spouse. And that was adding the option to elect to be treated as the deceased spouse. And so while there are a number of choices to select, this is potentially the optimal choice for a surviving spouse who is older than the decedent. The idea being, by electing to be treated as a decedent, they will delay the RMD until the decedent would have reached RMD age, which, being older, they would have had a longer period of time to wait before they need to take the RMD. And so you're, again, further pushing out when you're going to need to take that RMD.
And then we move into another area where an RMD provision was adjusted.
Yes, so this is no more Roth RMDs on 401ks, 403bs, and 457s. Roth IRAs never had an RMD requirement. So essentially, this is just equalizing Roth 401ks, retirement plans through a workplace to have similar treatment to Roth IRAs. So again, no more required minimum distribution from Roth 401k, 457, 403b, beginning in 2024. Just from a high level, this is a benefit because we want to keep the funds within a Roth IRA in that tax-deferred / tax-free growth shell as long as we can.
If we're continuing along our RMD train here.
Yeah, one more, and
one
we'll
more,
move on.
right? The caboose of the RMD provisions that changed. And this was a big one.
It was.
Right? Because there was a major penalty that you had to deal with if this was discovered in the past. So let's talk through that shortfall penalty.
So prior to the passing of Secure Act 2.0, the penalty for missing, so if you just either forgot or for whatever reason did not take an RMD, it was a 50% penalty for not taking that RMD, which, so far as I know, was one of the most aggressive surtaxes in the entire tax code. So 2.0 has reduced that penalty down to 25% from 50%, and they further reduced the penalty to 10% if the RMD is taken within what they refer to as the correction window. And so that's really going to be, say, the 2 to 3 year period after the tax year closes for the year you should have taken the RMD. So it's still something that you're going to need to be conscious of and be aware of. But if, again, for whatever reason, an RMD was not taken, if you quickly remedy that mistake or that issue of not taking it, that old penalty of 50% now drops to 10%. So still a potential penalty you may run into, but not nearly as aggressive as it used to be.
Good to hear those changes for required minimum distribution. So if we're moving into our second provision, where we saw a slight change, right, or a question I guess people would have on qualified charitable distributions, otherwise known as QCDs. Did the Secure Act 2.0 have anything to do with those changes there?
Yeah, so no major changes to QCDs. So you still have to be age 70 and a half to actually execute a qualified charitable distribution. It did change the maximum annual amount you can do. So this is somewhat unique, where you're going to have to find yourself in a tax situation where this would make sense, or you're incredibly charitably inclined. But it used to be that the annual maximum QCD you could do is $100,000 in 1 year. Beginning in 2024, that is going to be indexed for inflation. So it'll start to tick up slightly year over year from $100,000 and up.
Yeah, so those were two that were really focused on the retiree area for people that are retired or looking at retirement, thinking about retirement. I mean, obviously, there's still people that like to work into their 70s that provide some benefits other than income in many situations. But as we move into this third one here, we're talking more towards potentially business owners. So thinking about employment plans, employer retirement plans, if you are self-employed. Let's talk about some of the changes that we saw here.
Yep, so this is, again, focusing on that small business owner retirement plan options. So a couple of changes here, and I think they're all to a benefit. First, we'll start with a SEP IRA. So prior to the Secure Act 2.0, that account had to be funded on a pre-tax basis. They've now added an option to have a SEP Roth IRA. So you'll be able to fund the account on a Roth basis. And again, that being, you go ahead and pay taxes on the contribution today, but then the funds within the SEP IRA grow tax-free, and in retirement, you can pull it out. They're referring to this as the Rothification of the tax code. And the idea, if you think about it from a congressional standpoint, is they're trying to bring in revenue today versus you getting the tax deduction up front and delaying those taxes for decades into the future. So that's the first benefit. Again, something to evaluate year over year. If you're looking at your small business net profit at the very bottom line of your Schedule C or however your small business is set up, is evaluating, does it make sense for me to contribute on a pre-tax basis, or should I maybe introduce some Roth savings into my SEP IRA? So again, year over year decision to think through, but it's always good to have options.
And then this next one, I think it's good to line this up, right? Because you had the opportunity previously to make a SEP contribution after the end of the year, but the solo 401k, a little bit of a stopping point there at the end of the year.
Yeah,
Not a little
and
bit. It was a stopping point, right?
it
Still
is. It was, and it's something around the office. It's like this. You're at the end of the year. There's a lot of things going on, and it's basically with the solo 401k. So it's another retirement plan we work with small business owners. Prior to 2.0, the solo 401k had to be open by December 31st of the year in which you wanted to contribute. So again, you had a really hard deadline. But now, similar to the SEP IRA, that's always been this way, so far as I know. So for tax years 2023 and beyond, you will now be able to open up a solo 401k up until your tax filing deadline. So that'd be March 15th or April 15th-ish, depending on the year, and where you have the ability to open the account and fund the account by then. So it's not quite this hard deadline at the end of a calendar year. So it's adding a little bit of flexibility to get that account open and get that account funded without having that end of year rush.
love the flexibility, love options there. So I think that a good move there to line those up so that you don't have as much confusion in the type of retirement plan that you could do as a
Absolutely.
business owner. So as we move into our next provision change, still on that Rothification idea, right? And thinking through employer contributions.
There's going to be part of this that may or may not be welcome for some people, and there's going to be part of this is likely not going to be welcome initially, but we'll talk through some planning opportunities here. So prior to Secure Act 2.0, all employer matching and non-elective contributions to employee retirement plans occurred on a pre-tax basis. 2.0 includes language to expand the employer contribution options to now be able to select or elect to be treated as Roth. Note that in electing the employer contribution to be treated as Roth, the employer contributions would be treated as income to you in that year. So it's not like this tax-free contribution into your account. So you're going ahead and paying taxless employer contributions in the current year versus when you pull it out in retirement. So it's another one of these decision points where you say, depending on my tax situation, depending on what I expect my tax situation to be in the future, does it make sense to go ahead and fund it on a Roth basis, or should I maintain pre-tax contributions? So I think on that front, that one, again, adding flexibility, giving people the option, positive. Next up, maybe not so welcome, is catch-up contributions. So this is for people who are age 50 and older, beginning in 2024, individuals who have wages paid from their employer in excess of $145,000 per year will be required to make catch-up contributions as Roth. And so currently, these can be done as pre-tax. The idea, or really, again, this is that Rothification idea, and the government wants to get revenue today. So as a higher income taxpayer, the idea of having to contribute to your catch-up contributions to your 401k as Roth means you're going to be paying a little bit more tax today. You're not going to be offsetting higher income tax rates today. And so initially you're like, there's a little bit of downside there where you might be paying some more tax in a higher income year. But from a planning opportunity, again, really with earning higher income comes with higher tax rate. So it's unfortunate. But if we're given the option of saying, I'm no longer going to do catch-up contributions because I can only do it as Roth versus just having it go to a brokerage account or to a bank account, we're still going to likely, in most situations, recommend utilizing that catch-up just as Roth now. Again, this doesn't come into play until 2024, but kind of in the pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's giving you more ability to contribute to Roth accounts, right? Even though you will be taxed just as you are if it's going into a Roth IRA, it does allow you to have more going into Roth savings, which, down the road, it's nice to have that tax diversification and have some tax-free accounts or buckets that you're making decisions of where to pull money from, or for legacy planning, right? So it still has planning opportunities around it. Okay, and we're moving to the fifth one. Now, this is very interesting, the one that's probably most talked about outside of the RMD change, because this impacts a lot of people, and it's been one of those sticking points for conversations around saving in a 529 plan for years for people. And it wasn't always as big, likely of a problem as people felt like it was that they would be stuck with money in a 529 if it didn't get used for college expenses. But it is nice to see some new options here, Grayson. So let's break down the specifics of this, because I think there's a couple different layers, and you want to make sure that you understand the beneficiary provisions and how you would transfer money out to a Roth.
Those headlines are coming out, and I think, again, with the RMD, that one got a lot of attention. This one, I think, even more so, potentially, I guess, depending on the way you think of it. But these flashing headlights of tax-free rollover from 529 to Roth piques your interest, particularly from, I'm sure, for a lot of parents out there. Again, adding potential opportunity here from a planning perspective. But let's lay out some of the initial rules and the initial understanding of this 529 to Roth transfer or rollover. So at a maximum, $35,000 can be rolled from a 529 plan to a Roth IRA during the beneficiaries, not the owners, but the beneficiaries' lifetime. And this will not come into play until 2024. It's likely with a lot of these changes, they're giving custodians and everyone really the opportunity to digest all of these changes, because there are so many. So some of these provisions, again, are not coming into play until 2024. And to qualify for this rollover, the 529 must have been open for 15 years. So that's something that, of course, is not necessarily in your direct control today, but thinking about it moving forward, that account needs to be open for 15 years. The Roth IRA receiving the funds must be in the name of the 529 beneficiary. Any 529 contributions made within the last 5 years are not eligible to be rolled over. So it's not like you can just quickly fund it now and convert the full amount. So lastly, and I think most importantly, is the annual rollover limit is equal to the annual Roth IRA contribution limit. So for 2023, that annual limit is $6,500. And so while your lifetime conversion limit is $35,000, in 1 year, you could only do that $6,500. That gets indexed periodically, so it could be more. But $6,500 out of $35,000, it's going to take you a couple of years to eat up that full conversion amount. And additionally, the 529 beneficiary has to have earned income. So similar to be able to contribute to a Roth IRA, in general, you have to have earned income. So does your, in theory, child or whomever the beneficiary of this 529/Roth is. One way to think about it is if you have, say, a 16-year-old, they get a summer job and they have some earnings from that summer job, that can potentially put you in a position where they can start to convert some funds from the 529 to the Roth. And the $6,500 rolled over would represent their annual contribution or start to eat into it. So it's not like you can do a $6,500 conversion and they can contribute to $6,500. So it's limiting their ability to directly fund the account, but it's still something certainly to explore in that situation. One thing that is, I think, still a little unclear is if changing the beneficiary resets that 15-year clock for when the account needs to be open. From my reading and from what I've listened to, it appears that changing the beneficiary does not, but I do have a feeling, again, understanding this is not going to take effect until 2024, some additional guidance is likely going to be issued. And so initially, when you hear these headlines and you read some of these changes that are coming through, you think of it as really kind of potentially home run planning opportunity. And at a high level it is. But the one way I'm trying to think of it is the introduction of this provision does present what I kind of refer to as, say, a pressure release valve. To Chad's point, one of the sticking points to funding a 529 in the first place was, I don't want to accidentally overfund this account, or I don't want to fund it and then my child decides to take a different route, whether that be not going to college or they get scholarships or whatever it may be. And so by having that release valve, which is that conversion from the 529 to the Roth, I think parents up front will feel a little bit more comfortable funding the 529, and the ability to get the potentially overfunded 529 to a Roth can be really great seed money for a child, say, getting out of college, where we're going to start, converting these funds to a Roth IRA for them. And, if you look at the math from funding a 529 or a Roth from 18, say 20, 22, whenever they graduate, by the time they're 65, they're going to have a pretty nice retirement nest egg.
Yeah, so these plans obviously come along recently, it seems. In the last 5 years or so, we've had 2 or 3 of these, right, that come through near the end of the year that can have big changes, open up new planning opportunities for you. And we're trying to stay on top of that for you and make sure that we're taking advantage of what we can. There's some other smaller, different provisions, of course, that are taking place and going to be implemented in future years, particularly indexing some catch-up contributions for inflation. just increasing overall catch-up contributions for those that are in that category if you're in your 60 and up. So we'll, in 2025 and beyond, so we'll have more on that as those become implemented or available to you. So we can update our show notes on this post, and if you're listening to this, you can check it out at financialsymmetry.com. It'll be the latest one if you're listening right after we put this episode out. Otherwise, you can search Secure Act 2.0 on our search box in the future and read until your heart is content, or watch or listen, as with many other episodes that we've put together for you. Also, love your feedback. Keep that coming. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks.